Dear Mr. Umland, thank you so much for taking the time. In light of the current crisis in Ukraine, I want to ask a couple of questions about the relations between the US and the EU and Russia, and especially Germany. Germany is taking kind of a cautious approach and a rather neutral position. Could you explain why that is?
There is a whole range of factors, I think, that is determining as you said, cautious position of Germany. That has to do something with the tradition of close Russian German relations. It has to do something with the German tradition of not exporting weapons into conflict regions, which is now a hot topic here in Ukraine. Unfortunately, I would say. It has also to do something with the economic ties between Russia and Germany and the partial dependence of Germany on energy imports from Russia. So there's a whole range of factors that is sort of leading to this situation now that unfortunately in Ukraine is perceived often as a sort of betrayal of Ukraine and of European principles regarding Ukraine, of international law. To some extent that I think is justified, but also in other ways it's unjustified because the overall position of Germany is not anti-Ukrainian, and it has also become less pro-Russian during the last 8 years, and especially during the last weeks.
I see. And what role does Nord Stream 2 play in the situation, in the relations between Russia and Germany at the moment?
Yeah, Nord Stream 2 is one of the major points of disagreement, and there's an unfortunate misunderstanding here on the side of Germany that Nord Stream 2 is mainly about the income that Ukraine is indeed receiving from this transit of Russian gas towards the EU from the transportation of the Siberian gas to the European Union over Ukrainian territory, while in fact for Ukraine other factors are here more important, such as, for instance, the remaining economic leverage that Ukraine has vis-à-vis Russia. Ukraine used to have a lot of economic leverage vis-à-vis Russia because of the gas transportation through Ukraine that has been reduced after the start of operation of the Yamal pipeline, then of Nord Stream 1, and then of the two Black Sea pipelines, Turk Stream and Blue Stream. So this Russian dependence on the Ukrainian gas transportation system has been reduced already greatly, and now there's still some remaining dependence of Russia from the Ukrainian gas transportation system. And if Nord Stream 2 goes online, this remaining dependence will also be over, and then Putin will have free hand vis-à-vis Ukraine. That is the main worry here. Another worry is the operation of the Ukrainian gas transportation system once the transit function is not any longer necessary, because the Ukrainian gas transportation system has also an internal, a domestic function, and once this transit is not present anymore from Russia to the EU, the transportation system will be more difficult to operate, both technologically and financially. It may become unsustainable, and this situation may then create problems for cities, for enterprises, for households that are currently receiving gas in a situation in which Ukraine still transports large amounts of Russian gas through the same gas transportation system that is used for domestic purposes. And once this external purpose is not any longer prevalent, The fear is here that gas transportation within Ukraine can also become a big problem. And I think that is actually one of the major also aims of Russia, to make Ukraine economically unsustainable. We have this also now with the flight of investors and of businesses and of finances from Ukraine in the current tense situation. Ukraine is already experiencing large economic problems because of the currently military escalation or escalation of tensions. And my suspicion is actually that this sort of these aims are actually more important than the purely military aims that Russia wants to ruin, basically, Ukraine.
I understand. And you mentioned Germany's stance on exporting weaponry. They sent helmets to Ukraine to support the Ukrainian army, kind of as a sign of diplomacy. What other actions could they undertake should the situation escalate, or even now?
Well, Germany has a lot of leverage. Germany is perhaps the country in the West that has most leverage because it has close economic ties. It has a multitude of relations with Russia in all sorts of spheres, not only in the economic sphere, but also in such spheres as culture, science, technological cooperation, and so on. And in view of this large potential that Germany has in terms of exerting pressure on Russia, I think that the Ukrainian discussion about weapons for Ukraine is superfluous. Germany is much more important in other regards than in terms of delivering weapons. All the more so that Ukraine has its own arms industry, it's exporting weapons even, and it can buy weapons or even receive for free weapons from other countries. And German armaments would not be important for Ukraine. And these helmets, they are largely a symbolic gesture now from Germany. And, it's just 5,000. It's not even a large amount. If it had been several 10,000 helmets, maybe then, this would have been an effective gesture from Germany. But 5,000 is almost, I would say, worse than nothing, because it's so pathetic that it actually sends a wrong signal, and that it's too symbolic. So I think this whole discussion between Ukraine and Germany now about weapons is unnecessary, because Germany will not change its foreign policy doctrine because of Ukraine. And it's an old foreign policy doctrine of not delivering weapons into conflict regions. And therefore, I think this Ukrainian discussion about this issue is actually unnecessary.
I understand. So much for Germany. Do you think that the EU could find some united stance or even united way of action in this situation?
Well, in a way, I think you may be better to judge that from Vienna than me from Kiev here. That is, of course, what the Ukrainians hope. And the EU has a lot of leverage. So the EU is still the largest trading partner for Russia. It's the by far largest foreign investor in Russia, EU companies in their sum. And especially in terms of energy and finance, the EU is crucial still for the functioning of the Russian economy. I would even say for the Russian state, the Russian economy, the financial sector, the energy sector, the whole export sector, many sectors of the Russian economy are deeply integrated into the world economy and have still intense interaction with the EU, with EU companies, even after the sanctions introduced in 2014, which actually sent, I would say, a wrong signal. If you remember that the main sanctions that were imposed by the EU in July 2014 followed immediately the downing of the MH17 airliner on 17th of July. And they actually sent to Russia the signal that what you should do, you can do basically on the ground what you want in Ukraine. What you should not do is killing EU citizens in your wars that you conduct. So the EU imposed these sanctions on Russia at a moment when Ukraine was actually winning in the war in eastern Ukraine against the Russian proxies there. And when it seemed actually that in a few weeks the war would be over, and it obviously was punishing Russia not for what it was doing in Ukraine. That was the wrong moment for doing so, but it was punishing Russia for killing EU citizens. And so the message that Moscow got out of these sanctions that were then imposed was that we are not interested what's happening on the ground in Ukraine, whether you are in the offensive, whether Russia is in the offensive or in the defensive is not interesting for us. What is interesting for us is whether you will be killing EU citizens or not. And so even these sanctions that are often praised nowadays, they had, I would say, a counterproductive effect on the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. And the EU has not even used, half of what it could do in terms of containing Russia and soothing the situation in Eastern Europe.
And what are these actions that the EU could take that you just mentioned?
Well, the EU is a large political and economic actor, and as I said, the interactions between Russia and the EU in a whole range of fields is still exceptionally intense. In spite of the much propagated Russian turn to the east, the Russian-Chinese ties that are, very much on everybody's minds. If you look at the actual numbers in terms of trade, science, cooperation, technological cooperation, financial issues, tourism, and stuff like that, the EU is still the main partner for Russia. So, actually, there are so many options that the EU has potentially that this would, that would fill a separate conference. And for me personally, what would be most important is that the EU will actually do something material, something important, and not only, make more statements and, some sort of moralistic or ethical, declaration, which are now just triggering laughing here in the Ukrainians laugh about the Ukraine. We will get again a few nice words from the EU, some sort of worries in the EU and some sort of condemnation of Russia and some sort of support for Ukraine, but this is all rhetorical, verbal, symbolical, some sort of, and some minor sanctions again, a couple of persons, a couple of companies may be sanctioned, but far below what the EU could actually do, and not actually in real correspondence of the enormous range of options that the EU would have if it would seriously think about punishing Russia for what it is doing vis-a-vis Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine, and not what Russia is doing vis-a-vis EU citizens, as for instance when it shot down the Malaysian airliner and killed over 200 EU citizens. So that is the main issue here, that the EU is very, very well doing in terms of rhetorical, symbolical, verbal support, but it is not using actually its leverage vis-a-vis Russia. And it's also not enough supporting Ukraine. So Ukraine, and the same goes for Moldova and Georgia, still do not have EU membership perspectives, for instance.
And one last question, and excuse me if this is too speculative. You mentioned that Russia was trying to dry out economically Ukraine. What other things do you foresee happening in the near future, in the coming months, in this crisis?
Well, nobody knows for sure because obviously the costs and risks for Russia in the case of a real military escalation of an invasion of official invasion of Russian regular troops in mainland Ukraine. So Russian regular troops have already illegally invaded Crimea. There has been no large scale, or currently there is no large scale invasion of regular Russian troops of mainland Ukraine, irregular Russian troops, and some regular militaries are in eastern Ukraine already in the occupied parts, but there has been no major invasion. And that could happen. That is obviously what everybody is fearing. And this would be very risky and costly for Russia, but I cannot exclude that. But there are also other options for Russia, and perhaps they have been so far not sufficiently considered. The economic warfare, the political warfare, the cyber warfare, the information warfare that Russia is already conducting vis-a-vis Ukraine, and which may be actually the main instrument of trying to ruin the Ukrainian state and trying to basically make Ukraine behave as Russia wants. So I would think that we need more attention for these other instruments that Russia is exploiting and is already successfully exploiting. As I mentioned already, the flight of investors, of capital, also of human capital, of businesses from Ukraine. And that's why Zelensky has now, for instance, asked the West to be less alarmist regarding a major military escalation, because Ukraine is simply losing too much economically already because of this alarmism. So I can understand him in a way. So this is something that the West should more consider, because the Ukrainian state may become unviable if this continues, if all of the business activities here dry out, and if Nord Stream 2 goes online, and the gas transportation systems become unviable, then Russia may not need actually an army to destroy the Ukrainian state. So there are many things here to consider, but still I can also not exclude that we may have a major military escalation here.
I understand. Thank you so much, Professor Umland, for taking the time.
Thank you.